Hey out there, and welcome to today's Search Engine Journal webinar. We hope you're having an awesome day, and we are thrilled to have you with us. I am joined by Jessica Fleurot and Christophe Rene of Barnes & Noble and Botify. And today, we're going to be talking about SEO at scale. You'll get to learn what large e-commerce sites do differently. Most SEO professionals deal with complicated technical issues that don't exist for small businesses when they scale. So today, we're going to discover what large e-commerce businesses prioritize as they scale and see how this type of SEO scaling can skyrocket your brand. But before we get too deep into this, my name is Jennifer McDonald, and I'll be your moderator today. Jessica, Christophe, thank you so much for being with us. Before we get into our general housekeeping, can you tell us just a little bit about yourselves?
Sure, I can start. Hi, everyone. My name's Jessica. I am an SEO manager at Barnes & Noble currently. I've been in the SEO space for almost 8 years now. Currently, I work on SEO, A/B testing, and affiliate marketing at Barnes & Noble. And previous to that, I did SEO and social media marketing at 1-800-Flowers family of brands.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. And I'm Christophe Rene. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Botify. And Botify is a SaaS enterprise platform for SEO. And before that, I worked in media for 15 years, also doing SEO and product management.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, I know I'm excited to have you guys here, and I know everyone else is too. So thank you so much for that introduction. So first, for those of you who have webinared with us before, you'll notice that this is a slightly different platform. If you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box and let us know. There are separate tabs for questions and chat, so take a second, get familiar with those functions at the top right of your screen. Chat is where you're free to talk amongst yourselves and, of course, us. Q&A is for any questions you have during the webinar, and as you know, we'll answer as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. In addition to all of these goodies, there's also a closed caption option. Just click that little CC in the top right of your corner. Throughout the webinar, we're going to do our absolute best to link any resources or tools in the chat, but if we miss one, just ask. Resources will also be included in your recap email. After the webinar, stick around for a short survey, should take 3 minutes or less. This information is going to be great for helping us gauge what works and how we can make these webinars more useful for you. And lastly, you're going to receive a full recording of this training later today, so watch your inbox. That's enough for me. Without any further delay, let's get to it. Jessica, Christophe, I'll be back at the Q&A, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much. So let's get started, and let's talk about SEO at scale. So first, a little bit of an agenda here. We've done the introductions. We're going to talk about the challenges of having a large website and even what is a large website. And then Jessica is going to share a lot of information about what she is doing at Barnes & Noble to help scale the SEO practice. And ultimately, we'll finish with the Q&A. Hopefully, you have a lot of great questions for us. As we start the presentation, I just want to give a few words about Botify that some of you might not know. Botify is an enterprise SEO platform, and we are used by large websites, actually, who are trying to optimize their organic search. And who wants to, obviously, at the end of the day, grow traffic and revenue, but in a way that is efficient, measurable, and sustainable. And we all know that SEO is such a channel. And so that's what we do with all of our customers at Botify. Jessica, a few words about you and Barnes & Noble.
Sure. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Barnes & Noble, but for those of you that don't know, it's the largest bookstore chain in the US. In terms of what's new with Barnes & Noble, about 2.5 years ago, Barnes & Noble was acquired by Elliott, which is now led by CEO James Daunt, who also owns the largest bookstore chain in the UK. So having a CEO with so much experience in the bookstore field has been immensely helpful for the business. We've really gone back to our roots of like good old book selling throughout the stores and online. We've been really focusing on the expertise of our booksellers, our passion for books, and showcasing and recommending the books that will be most of interest to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for accepting to share some of your knowledge about SEO. I'm sure it's going to be a blast for attendees. So as we start, let's talk about large websites and what is even a large website today on the web. So at Botify, usually we consider a website as being large when it has about 1 million URLs or more. Actually, Barnes & Noble today has more than 9 million URLs. But some of the biggest e-commerce websites in the world have more than 250 million URLs. So as we think about that scale, obviously you can understand that it's not possible anymore to do everything manually, to optimize every single page for keywords. At that scale, you need to automate a lot more. But also, that scale creates problems. One of those is obviously coming from search engines. Search engines have to go through hundreds of billions of pages on the web. The web is huge, getting bigger every day, and more complex also to understand. Now, these search engines, Google obviously being the biggest, have limited resources. They have to think efficiently about how are they going to find and refresh all of these pages out there. And because of these resources that are limited, search engines have to figure out how much time they're going to spend on every single website. That's what we call the crawl budget. Ultimately, what is crawl budget? Crawl budget is about the amount of attention your website receives from search bots. How many pages can be crawled in a given time frame from a search engine? And we're talking about crawl budget here because the bigger your website is, the more chances there are that your website is impacted by crawl budget. And we see it all the time at Botify when we analyze large websites. We've seen actually that in average, 77% of these large website pages are actually not getting any traffic from search engines. Now, why is that so? A key element when you think now that search engines have trouble to actually find every page and update every page on the web just because the web is too big is that some of your pages on your e-commerce website or large websites might not even be known by search engines. We like to look at SEO as a funnel. Everything starts with search engines being able to crawl your own website and to discover every page on your website through crawling. Now, these days, crawling alone is not enough. They also need to render pages. Most of the websites out there these days have a lot of JavaScript to have dynamic content for users. This dynamic content needs to be rendered in order to see everything that's behind it. This creates additional resources constraint for search engines, by the way. Once your website is crawled and rendered, then only then it can be indexed in the search results. At that point, your pages can actually be found by users typing keywords in search engines. Then you can rank. And ultimately, you hope to get visits and revenue out of these users. Now, if you think about all of this process, you can understand that if your pages in the first place cannot be found by search engines, then you have no chance to rank or convert from these pages. And that's why it's so important for large websites to think about the top of the funnel, to think about how you implement changes, implement optimization to your website so that ultimately it's easy for search engines to find your most strategic pages. Doing all of this requires a lot of what we call technical SEO. And that means a lot of optimizations have to be made on your website. And they are really the foundations of SEO for large websites. All optimizations we're talking about here, as we're talking about technical optimization, mean that you need technical resources to actually implement this optimization. It means you need to work with product engineering to implement all of this. And without these resources, you're going to have a hard time to actually make a difference. Now, what we're going to talk about today is the type of things that large e-commerce websites implement to help them scale. And a lot of these things obviously have to be automated. As we said earlier, it's not possible to do everything manually page by page. Now, one example of optimization that websites can do can be faceted navigation. You probably have used these faceted navigation as a user. They are very efficient to help you navigate inside of a website. But they can be a blessing or a curse actually for search engine bots. The reason for this is that they allow search bots to find a lot of pages, which might be a great thing, but they can also potentially become what are called spider traps. Search engines can actually start clicking on all of these links and ultimately find an unlimited amount of combinations of all of these variables that are available on your website. And suddenly the search engine bots cannot know the end of your website anymore. This creates crawl budget issues because ultimately your website is going to be crawled on pages that might not be as efficient or important to you than other pages. And so we'll talk today about how Barnes & Noble are optimizing, for example, faceted navigation, amongst other topics. as I've said here, automation is a key to success. With large websites, you cannot take this white glove approach of optimizing each and every page on your website. You need to think strategically. You need to think about doing things at scale. And Jessica today is going to tell us a little bit more about how she is doing this. Now, before we jump on the details from Barnes & Noble, let's summarize a few things. What we're going to talk about is how to spend crawl budget wisely. What is important there so that search bots can actually find your most strategic pages. We're also going to talk about how do you prioritize internally. We said that you're going to need technical resources, which means you're going to be able to justify these technical resources. And one way, obviously, to do that is to be able to link SEO to revenue. And ultimately, everything you want to do here has to be automated as much as possible so that it can scale across millions of pages. Now, let's jump into Barnes & Noble with Jessica. So first, Jessica, first question here, as we've talked about crawl budget, can you tell us a bit more about how you are spending efficiently your crawl budget?
Sure. So I think the first thing I would say for managing crawl budget is managing your out of stock products. We have millions of products on our site, and that also means that there are quite a few out of stock products or temporarily out of stock products. And it's a bad user experience to land on an out of stock product. Plus, you're wasting Google's time because they're crawling these products that, aren't available. So you're not going to get sales from them right away. So what you want to do is 404 any product pages that are never coming back. Unless they have a lot of backlinks, then you probably want to redirect the page instead so you can keep that SEO value. But for temporarily out of stock products, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go. But personally, I think the best way, you shouldn't 404 them because you want to keep that SEO value. But I think you should keep the page live with messaging that the product is temporarily out of stock. If you have the date that it's going to come back in stock, you should definitely add that as well. And updating the availability in your product schema if you have it so that Google is aware. If you do update it in your schema, it will come up in search results that it's not in stock. But ultimately, I think it's the best user experience for customers. And then if it's a high priority product, you could always request that Google recrawl that page once it's back in stock. But by sending them the correct out of stock signals, you're telling Google that your priority is your in-stock products, which of course you want customers to land on. Next, I would say managing site performance. So site speed, it's important for both bots and for users. If your code is bulky, bots still have to crawl and parse all of that data, and it takes up time. So this all goes back to crawl budget. It's, if you have errors on your site, you're wasting Google's time again, and errors are bad for user experience. And I'm sure you're going to hear me say user experience a bunch of times in this webinar today, because it is said to be a ranking factor, and Google has said again and again that user experience is one of the most important things to them. So we always try to keep that in mind. And then something that you briefly touched on before, faceted navigation. It can create a lot of duplicate content, but at the end of the day, faceted navigation is there because it's helpful for users. So you need to keep what's useful, and you may want to no index very specific filtered pages or pages that don't have any search volume, and keep an eye on any duplicate or near duplicate content. And at Barnes & Noble, we have been, just to be upfront about everything, we have been no indexing some of our more specific filtered pages or ones that don't get search volume, like specific price filters, or if you go down to format and price, and as you were saying before, Christoph, there's just so many filters that you can add where the results become very specific and you might only have 1 or 2 books in your results. So those types of pages we try to no index so that we're not overloading Google with pages. And then duplicate content I mentioned. The last thing I think is that we try to prioritize pages and optimizations based on revenue impact. I think this is pretty common for large e-commerce sites, but it is difficult to do, especially since natural search, it can be so difficult to track back to a specific change that you made. And it does look different for every business, but for Barnes & Noble, books are our focus, and we do have priority titles. So we try to make sure that those pages are optimized, that they're linked to frequently. We make sure that they're in our XML sitemap and getting crawled and indexed. And we check our log files to make sure that that's happening, or you can use Google Search Console to check that the page has been crawled and indexed. I think that's it for this one.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit again about something you said earlier about performance, because I see sometimes confusion with users about performance from a user standpoint and performance from a bot standpoint. And it's important to think about these two things. It's in the same way, but also to think that each has its own needs. So on the one hand, users obviously need a great user experience. You want to make sure your website is fast and can load everything properly. And ideally, the bot will have the same experience. Now, think also that the bots will have, as I said earlier, to render everything on your page. So the more JavaScript, for example, you put on a page, usually is going to be extremely costly for bots to process. A page that can take 1 second to load can take a few additional seconds to render everything. All of these seconds are going to be taking out your crawl budget. And so ultimately, if you take 3 or 4 seconds per page, that means the bots will be able to see less pages on your website. So you really need to think about performance from users, from a user standpoint, and for bots also in order to optimize crawl budget.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to doing things right. Like, you don't want to take the easy route, making things fixed for your users, but not for bots. I think a lot of the times the projects for SiteSpeed can be pretty daunting and large, but doing it the right way, I think at the end of the day is the best way to go.
Yeah. You mentioned user experience again earlier when you were talking about faceted navigation and the fact that ultimately for you and for users and obviously for Google, it's about which pages make sense. If you start indexing a lot of pages with only 1 or 2 books in your example, that's probably not a great user experience, especially maybe at some point, pages are going to have the similar books recommended for various filters. And so it's not good for users, not good for Google, obviously. And so that means that you need to think about how you take care of these, as you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. As we think about all of these things, then we mentioned earlier that to be efficient there, to optimize for faceted navigation and for all of these things, you need to work with product engineering. Now, the question for you is, how do you do that? Can you give us some tips on how to work with product engineering effectively to get things done? Because one thing I hear again and again from everyone is that it takes months to implement any SEO optimization on websites, because everyone has a lot of things to do in their backlog and it's hard to prioritize. So can you give us a few tips on how you get things done?
Yes, and I definitely agree with that sentiment. It does take a long time. Sometimes we submit project requests and they get reviewed with projects submitted from all other aspects of the business, from operations to customer service to marketing. So we typically try to give an ROI number in our project requests, as that's often the best way to get your project prioritized higher. And our company is also a bit unique in that we currently don't run any paid ads. So natural search is a pretty high priority for the business. But regardless of how important natural search is, it still has to compete with company-wide initiatives. So there's definitely some work that needs to be done to get our project noticed. We also try to educate other teams so that they can become advocates for SEO, especially when you have a small team. Like, my team is just me and one other person. It really helps, since you can't be in every project meeting at every time. But if you educate your team members, then you can have some comfort in knowing that if your team members think there will be an SEO issue, they'll reach out to you about it. So typically for educating a team on SEO, I'll build an SEO 101 deck, which has all the basics from like what is SEO to the content and tech stuff. And then I'll tailor it to each team. So if there's something that I think a particular team will come in across as they work in their day-to-day, I'll include that in there just so that they know when it comes up, like, oh, I should be thinking of SEO at this time, or maybe I should reach out to the SEO team. So that has been really, really helpful.
Yeah, this is a great point. And this is actually something we see a lot from our customers. The most mature customers who are successful there have put in place programs like yours in order to educate everyone about SEO. Because ultimately, SEO is not just about the SEO manager doing things. It's about everyone who's touching the website, from your development team doing a lot of adding a new features on your website to your content writers. Everyone is touching the website, meaning everyone has a stake in SEO and must know enough about it in order to help you succeed.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So one aspect you mentioned is about revenue. So I'm curious to hear you maybe a little bit more about how do you keep track of all of this?
Yep. So using average order value, conversion rate, and margin rate, we can generally forecast revenue based on visitor increase, which would ultimately come from position increases. So I don't want to get too complicated, but first, if you estimate the number of visits you would get by improving in rank, you can multiply that by conversion rate and then multiply that by average order value, you would get an incremental revenue number. So that's typically the kind of number we would use. At Barnes & Noble, we're also really focused on profitability. So we also take into account margin rate. And, revenue estimates are always kind of a gray area. So we typically make conservative and aggressive forecasts, especially since SEO can be really hard to track back directly to revenue. So I think it's important to, temper your estimates. So also, we try to make it a bit of a cross-functional responsibility. I mentioned that we don't have paid search ads, so we don't have competition there. But affiliate marketing, I find, does sometimes get the credit for organic traffic. But we work closely with our analytics team to review all of our data, and we're making sure that we're working with affiliate partners that are profitable for the company and not just, that loyalty or coupon affiliate that we're coming to at the last second just to get that deal and taking away from a natural search order. So, just making sure you have all of that data in mind and working with partners that you think are good for your brand. And as far as attribution, so I think most companies, at least we use last touch channel as our attribution model, but we also look at first touch, especially when it comes to affiliate tracking. As I mentioned, we want to see the entire customer journey. Like, where is a customer coming from? Are they coming from natural search and then just going for the coupon and ending up with affiliate? It's important to know where your customers are coming from and where they're going. So that's how we try to keep an eye on revenue here. Oh, I think you're muted.
No. Okay.
Uh-oh, did we lose Christoph?
No. All right. Excellent. Perfect.
All right, it looks like we're having a few issues. So until they come back, Jessica, do you want to go forward with how can you manage a 1 million plus page site without automation and kind of dive into that for us?
Sure, yeah, I'll keep going.
Great.
One second, my screen's being a little laggy too. But anyway, I'll try to do it without the screen. So, I mentioned my team is very small. It's just me and one other team member. So I don't think it can be done without some form of automation, even if it's as simple as having a title tag and meta description template for your pages. We have templates for our product pages, which I mentioned we have millions of product pages. We couldn't possibly optimize every single one. So we have a template that pulls in the product title. We have a meta description template, and we can always override the template if we need, but it can be, something as small as that to something as big as having your own algorithm for related searches, which is something that we recently created at Barnes & Noble. We actually built a related searches widget on our site. So it improves interlinking throughout our site, including to long tail searches. So it's just another example of something that's automated, but we still manage it. So I think that's true for most forms of automation, is you can't just set it and forget it. It still needs some kind of management. And the slides are coming in and out for me. Even faceted navigation is an example of automation too, since it creates new pages automatically, but that you need to be really careful that you manage those pages, since you can easily create thousands of near duplicates. Okay, slides are back. Just clicking through. Okay. So SEO practices that I think are imperative to e-commerce success in 2022. First, I'm going to say the fundamentals. I think monitoring your errors, checking your log files, SEO copy updates, those are things that are never going to go away. Like, for as long as I've been in SEO and for as long as I've learned about SEO, those have always been important, and I think they will continue to be. And they're really the basis of having a strong website for SEO. So definitely number one and always going to be on my list. Next, I would say site speed. It's important for users and for bots, as we mentioned. The site speed algorithm updates went live, but I'm sure it's going to get more competitive over time. And again, good for user experience. And then next, I would say the importance of unique content. So at Barnes & Noble, we sell the same products that Amazon sells. Our books are not unique to our brand, but what is unique to our brand is our bookstores and our booksellers, that we leverage the expertise of our booksellers to create unique content and recommendations. So we've been working on, getting more reviews on our product pages. We also use bookseller reviews. So, I think just adding unique content to your site is important and a way to differentiate yourself from other competitors.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Welcome
And sorry
back.
for the sorry for the trouble.
No problem.
Hopefully everyone had a lot of great information from everything you shared, but now it's time for Q&A. So let's see from the audience who has questions.
Hey everyone, it looks like we are back and just in time for the Q&A. So let's dive right in. We got some really great questions. I think you guys are going to have a great time with these. So right out of the gate, our first question comes from Simone. When booksellers are given the same book title, author, description, and image by the publisher, how does Barnes & Noble stay competitive in the SERP, particularly when you're competing against Amazon's domain authority?
Yeah, so this is, kind of exactly what I was just saying at the end there, is that we try to stay unique in different ways, but I think the main thing is our bookseller expertise. We're not using algorithms, man-made algorithms, or automated algorithms, I should say, to recommend products. We're using actual booksellers that are reading the books, determining what the next big thing is going to be, coming up with who the next big author is going to be, and recommending those books to you, in store and online. And differentiating the product overview, I think, has been really helpful for us, since, as you mentioned, we get all that information from the publisher, but we've been creating what we call notes from your bookseller, and we add it directly into our product overview at the top. And it's just basically a little bookseller review that differentiates our copy. And we think that will, eventually help us to be a little bit more unique and stand out from Amazon.
Awesome. Very good. Very good. Our next question comes from Melvin. I'm curious, is there a bad reason to have a pre-order book option if the book is currently out of stock but will be stocked later?
No, I don't think so. I think it's important to have it up because if you don't, your competitors are going to have their products up and they're going to be getting SEO value from that while you're, kind of left in the dust. And when you do get that product up, you're going to be a little bit left behind. So I do think, you do want to be transparent that your product is not available right now. But if you have that date of when it's going to be in stock, definitely add that. And, out of stocks happen. And especially nowadays, the world is pretty uncertain of what's going to be in stock and out of stock. So I think just be transparent with your customers.
I would add something maybe to this one because I've seen some websites abusing this, and obviously it's fine if you have an actual product that's out of stock and you want to wait for it. But if you start publishing pages for the iPhone 20, hoping for it to be ready when the time comes, it might actually get you penalized because Google will think that you're really trying to game the system. And I've seen that with publishers, for example, getting dinged because they were kind of talking about things that don't exist yet, try to put some words in a page to make it seem like they know what they're talking about, even though they don't have anything to say, and they get penalized for that. So as usual, make what's good for the user, and you will be good.
Excellent. Well, that makes absolute sense. We have a question from Tech. Tech would like to know, how does Barnes & Noble manage XML sitemaps?
So our XML sitemaps are actually automated. We update them every so often to remove any 404 pages or pages that are redirecting, and to add more products or newer release products. We are definitely trying to add more sitemaps because right now not all of our products are included, but we do just try to prioritize, some of our top priority titles. And for the most part, it is automated. But again, automated but managed.
Makes sense. Our next question comes from Kate. Kate would like to know, what are your preferred SEO tools for large sites, e.g. Screaming Frog, Deep Crawl, SEMrush, etc.?
Well, shameless plug to Botify, who is working on this with me. But honestly, I really do like Botify for site crawling. Screaming Frog I don't think can handle our site. It would probably crash our computers. We just have too many pages. But Botify is kind of like an all-in-one. I also love SEMrush or SEMrush, however you pronounce it. We recently started using them, and I think they're really, really good for competitive research. And then, I typically just use the Google tools besides that, like Search Console, PageSpeed Insights. I think those pretty much cover the basics.
That's awesome. Yeah, I personally had to retrain myself away from SEMrush into SEMrush. So it's kind of a struggle sometimes. So I'm there with you, but we've chosen SEMrush. So here we go. Our next question comes from Greg. Greg would like to know, does it make sense to no index pages that have largely the same content as your competitors because it might be seen as duplicate content?
So I guess I would ask for an example here, because if you're saying that you're selling the same product as a competitor, then no, like that would be, Amazon sells Where the Crawdads Sing, we sell Where the Crawdads Sing. I wouldn't no index our page because of that. But if it's, like blog content or something that you're reposting, then that might be a little different. So I think it depends on the case.
Excellent. I think that will be included. That question will be included with the follow-up. So there might be a chance for Greg to get a little bit more of that specific detailing in for everyone. So that's excellent. Let's see. Along that same vein, Simone has a question. How do you manage product duplication, such as multiple editions of the same book in hardcover, softcover, ebooks, etc.? Do you optimize them individually or do anything specific for those pieces?
So we have, our canonical URL, which is, let me think of a better way to describe this. So we tie all of our formats back into one ID, and that ID is used in our canonical URL. So only the main format is indexed, and then all the others canonical back to that main page. So in that way, we don't have duplicate content, because I think it's just too similar for, just the format to change to have a completely different URL for that page.
Makes sense. Wow. Let's see. Our next question comes from Jacob H. What project management and content management tools do you use? More specifically, do you use apps like ClickUp, communication apps like Slack? How does the team work together effectively?
We use Microsoft Teams, and we actually don't use Slack, but I know a lot of companies do. But I think Teams has been pretty useful for all of us. It definitely was like a learning curve when we all started working from home, but other than it occasionally crashing, it's been pretty useful. We use Jira for like ticketing and more tech things, but yeah, I think like Teams, groups, and SharePoint has worked fine for us.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it sounds like, depending on what your business is structured as, you'll find something that fits for your specific needs. Excellent. Varun has a question. His question, or their question, is Google is crawling but not indexing large parts of my website. How do we fix that?
So that sounds like you have a crawl budget issue. First, I would say make sure that there aren't no index tags on your pages. I know that seems like a basic answer, but it does happen sometimes. And sometimes there's things that happen that we don't even expect that comes out in a release or whatever the case. So definitely check that. Then, if you have access to your log files, I would look at those. If you have access to a tool like Botify, I think it's really useful because you can see, you can run a crawl of your site and see what Google is crawling versus what the Botify bot is crawling, and kind of diagnose from there. Like there might be a multitude of tech issues that are happening. I think there's just like a lot of research that you have to kind of dig into, and sometimes SEO, you just have to keep drilling. So definitely try to look at your log files. But overall, it sounds like, I don't know if you're looking in Search Console and you're seeing like they're discovered but not indexed, or what the case is, but it does sound like Google might be wasting their time on pages that aren't as important to you. So just looking at what Google is actually crawling.
Makes sense. Naomi would like to know, did you ever think to open your inner search bar results for indexing, such as Etsy or Amazon, to create categories?
Yeah, it's definitely something we thought about, but we just have so many pages on our site already. I think it's a little overwhelming. I think in certain cases it can work, but the way that our CMS is, we just typically create category pages instead, and we'll redirect a user to that page if we find that that search is very specific. Like if you go onto our internal search and you type in Harry Potter, we'll redirect you to our Harry Potter page. So, and also we just find that that's a better user experience too, maybe, than our search results page. So, it depends. Like, I think you can go either way. If you find that search results are easy for you to open up to bots and a good user experience, then fine. Or if you want to merchandise a separate page for it, then I think that's fine too. But just making sure that you only have one indexable.
That's wonderful. I love that landing page. That's fantastic. Casey would like to know, how do you calculate the revenue impact for project requests?
So I mentioned this a little bit, but I think it depends on the project, first of all. Like if you're talking about something that will impact product pages, then you just kind of want to estimate, like, is your change going to increase rankings? And if so, how much do you think it's going to increase rankings? Or if it's a specific product type, like how much revenue are we already getting from that product type, and how much do we expect to see increase? And I typically use more conservative forecasts. I know I mentioned using both like aggressive and conservative, but I usually like to use conservative just because I don't like to overhype my projects, I guess. But you know, it's also important to point out that like our team is very educated on SEO, and they understand that it might not be that black and white where like we do this and revenue is going to increase by this. Like they kind of expect that it is likely to increase revenue, but not exact. So I think for us, we don't have to be super on point with the revenue, but just having that like general idea does help prioritize. And it really does come down to like what the project is, what you are hoping to get out of it, and then trying to estimate from there.
Excellent. Excellent. Our next question doesn't seem to have a person attached to it, so shout out to this person. But the question is, you said you're returning a status 404 for products that won't come back in stock. Do you first look to see if these pages have values such as links per authority? And if yes, do you have pages that you are redirecting to? What is your strategy for those 404 product pages?
So it's not something that we typically look at, I would say. I think it's only a case for like really high value products, but in that case, we don't typically completely remove them. I think it's pretty rare that we would, you know, have a product completely go away and it also be a product that has a ton of backlinks. So I don't think we come across that case too frequently, but you know, I think it would come from potentially other parts of our business where they would say like, this is a really high priority product that we're not going to have anymore, just like FYI. And then we would have to work from there, but it's not something that we frequently deal with.
Gotcha. This next question from Jacob H. I think you might have touched on this a little bit before, but I think there may be a couple more nuggets in here that we could find. And Jacob's question is, what automation tools has Barnes & Noble used in the past? What are you using now? And why did you switch?
So I don't know that we use specific automation tools. Trying to think of an example. I mean, like some of the automation that I mentioned earlier, it's not, I guess, what you would call like AI or anything like that. It's more just how can we speed up the work that we already do or automate the work that we do. So a lot of it is just done through the tools that we use in our day-to-day, in our CMS and in our back-end systems. So yeah, I can't think of any tool that we like specifically use for a form of automation.
That's perfect. Sounds good to me. I mean, every company is going to have their own needs and their own tools that are already in place. So I think it's really great to kind of see how we can create these automations with something that already exists. So I think anything that works for your business is going to be perfect. Craig's question is, how do you audit to discover near duplicate pages? What is your evaluation criteria for determining the level of content similarity to then decide if a page is indeed a near duplicate of another? I'll ask it again if you need me to. That one was a little long.
I think I got it, but I'll give an answer. And then if I don't cover it all, then you can repeat. But so for me right now, typically I'll go into Botify and I'll look at pages that have the same header. And it's all based on the way your site is set up. So like, this is why I'm saying this is how I'm doing it now, because I'm sure things will change in the future. But typically what I found is that either the header or the title tag will be the same on pages that are created automatically by our CMS, either like in the faceted navigation or something like that. So those pages I'll pull from Botify, like duplicate headers, duplicate title tags, or even duplicate meta descriptions, but that doesn't come up as frequently for us. But that is one way. And Christoph, I don't know if you want to jump in at all. Maybe there's like other ways that you've seen clients or like ways that you can do it in Botify or through other tools. But
yeah, I mean, so in Botify you also have actually duplicate score, where we remove the template from your pages and we just compare the content between pages, and we will tell you which pages are very similar from a content standpoint. So that's one way to look at it also in Botify.
That's true. Yeah. If a page is templated, then I know Botify will like take away that template and just say also like how thin your content is. So that can be a little bit helpful too.
All right. Austin would like to know, given the narrative of a cookieless world, do you think there's a recognized importance for enterprise e-commerce companies to shift a bit towards owned channels rather than paid ones?
Well, I guess I'm a little biased here, but I mean, I think it depends. Again, this is like such an SEO answer, but it does depend on your business, where your business's stage is. Like, we are in the process of kind of rebuilding our brand a little bit, like going back to our roots. I mentioned we got a new CEO, and we're just kind of going back to the good old book selling. And with that, we're going back to, being a more profitable business. And some of that comes from, I'm like losing track of what I'm saying, but some of it just goes back to like not, I'm already lost my train of thought.
Oh, it's okay. You got it.
Yeah, I think it depends on your business. And for us right now, natural search is a good priority for us versus paid search. When we turned off paid search ads, we were spending a ton of money, and we didn't really see that dip in traffic when we turned them off. I think a lot of it just went back to natural search, and we're building our brand right now. And I think natural search is the right route for us. And also, we've been doing more and more affiliate marketing. But as we continue to grow, I think at that point, it might make more sense to work on paid search. But, it really depends on where your brand is in the process of like building yourself up.
That makes sense. That makes absolute sense. And I think, that affiliate marketing portion is kind of acting in a way as some of that kind of owned media in a way. So I think that finding those other pathways to navigate outside of cookies is a great next step. And it sounds like Barnes & Noble is already doing that. So that's fantastic. Let's see. Sergey has a question for Jessica. How do you integrate / stitch AA data, revenue, AOV, CER, with Google Search Console data at Barnes & Noble?
I think a lot of that is actually manual for us, although we definitely want it to be more automated. But, we typically pull them separately and just like put them into our own reports. So I don't have a great way for that right now, but definitely like something we want to do.
Kate has a question. Her question is, how do you manage keyword research and content creation for such a massive website?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are a lot of product pages. So product pages, unless they're super high priority, we don't typically change the SEO copy on them. We just focus on like the reviews and our bookseller reviews. But for category pages, I think this is like common for most brands where, as the seasons are changing or as different priorities are coming up, that comes down from our category management team, and they'll reach out to us and say like, hey, we have this St. Patrick's Day page, like make sure it's optimized, or things like, Stephen King is having a new book come out, so we should make sure his page is updated. So I think it really depends on like what's happening in the world. With books, everything is kind of trendy. Like when a new book comes out by an author, we try to update those author pages, the seasonal things that always come up. So we tend to prioritize those. And then when we have time, we work on the regular like striking distance keywords and some of our, year-round category pages.
Makes absolute sense. I love Stephen King, so that made me feel happy just to hear you guys talk about that a little bit. Next question. What's the one thing you've done that has had the biggest impact on your site performance?
Honestly, I think image optimization. So for us, like we were using really large images that were totally unnecessary. We weren't compressing them. So, that made a huge difference for us. And we also implemented lazy loading. So I think that was like a really kind of quick win for us because it was mostly just a change to how our processes are, adding in that step to compress our images and optimize them. And then, the lazy loading was a project, but, we prioritized it and got it done. And I think that made a big difference for us.
Absolutely. That makes sense as well. I love it. Jennifer has a question. We've been hearing a lot about AI and automation for years now. Is it actually here?
I think so. I mean, if you are in your house right now, and I won't say her name because I have one right here, but if you have like an Amazon device, that is AI, right? You're speaking to it like you would a person. I saw a meme recently that was like, oh, I can't believe I'm getting confused by my servicing bots. And it's like, Alexa versus Google versus Siri. Oh, now she's lighting up. But but we definitely are in that world. I think it's just like how far along we are. And I think if you look back at where we were 10 years ago, things have really changed. And, it definitely is here, just maybe not in the fullest aspect of it. But I think we need to kind of take a step back and look at how far we've come and the technology that we do have today. And, bots can write copy for us now if we wanted, it's like, it really is here, I think.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, it's just been incredible to see the change, or rather changes that have happened over the last decade, and just really seeing it come to a head as we move forward and try to understand how to create content in this new world. Awesome. Craig has a question. Is Barnes & Noble a single page application? Do you pre-render each of your pages to overcome crawl issues associated with SPA JavaScript intensive websites?
We're not a single page application. So we don't have to deal with that. But if you are, yes, you should definitely be server-side rendering.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Naomi would like to know, are you using structured data for books and not for products?
No, we use product schema for all products, and we use, book schema for books. So we do both.
Excellent. Next question is, what are the main types of URL extensions or parameters on large e-commerce sites that you block from Google's crawler to save crawl budget and prevent unnecessary indexing?
I mean, any kind of tracking parameter, I think. We used to have like different sorting parameters. I think they're still around. It's something that, at least with parameters, I think it is something you kind of set and forget. I know I mentioned before, like there aren't a lot of things you set and forget. I think this is one of them. But I don't know if I have a list in my head. I know we have a ton of parameters that we do not necessarily block, but we put them in Search Console, and you can tell them what the parameter does. So I think any kind of parameter you should just add in there, and it kind of handles it for you, I think.
Awesome. Jenny would like to know, what tools do you use to manage site speed and UX impact?
Really good. Just Google's Page Speed Insight tool has been, the go-to. I think, well, one, because it's Google's tool, but they are constantly updating it and trying to include more helpful information in there of like, yeah, here's a recommendation, but also here's how you can do it. So I think that one's been really great. The waterfall test, I forget, is it web page test? That one is useful as well because you can see the order of how everything loads. And that one just, another free website. And what was the other question besides site speed? Was it user experience?
That's right. You got it.
I mean, so we have a separate user experience team. I don't know if there are any tools they use specifically, but I can't think of any tools that we use like exactly for that. I think, again, it's just like our regular tools and like analyzing the data from our site, analytics of like bounce rate and things like that to determine if a site is user-friendly or not.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And I think we have time for just one more question. So let me see. I'm going to peek through real quick. We do have quite a lot of questions remaining. So the good news is that we will have these answered after the webinar and that follow-up that we'll put out. So let me see what I can find as a good final here. Okay, so this one's a two-part question from Austin. The first part is, what tools do you suggest enterprise sites use to scale their organic search efforts?
Well, I mentioned that, I guess, like, again, I'm biased, but I mentioned that we use SEMrush, which I think is really, really helpful for competitive research and tracking your rankings. I think you do need some kind of ranking tool, and SEMrush is just really affordable, but it also gives you a ton of data. And Botify, like, with the largeness of our site, we do need some kind of site crawler, and Botify has been great for us. And we can tie in Search Console with that. We tie in our log files, so it gives us more of the tech side with Botify and then more of the content side with SEMrush.
Excellent. And then my favorite part of this question, part two, any tips on how to synergize and integrate those tools together?
I haven't thought about that.
Well, I will help you out on this one because
Okay,
we're actually working on integrating SEMrush with Botify so that you can bring in this competitive data into Botify to look at everything together. So that's going to help you there.
There you go. That works out. I think it's great to look for those kind of integrations that are already preset and pre-baked into those tools. That makes it a lot easier for everyone. Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much for submitting those questions, and thank you too for answering those questions. We had a lot of great information and questions and people just coming forward and really excited and having a great time with the webinar. We didn't get a chance to answer all the questions, but don't worry. Those will be sent in a follow-up email. So with a couple of seconds left, Jessica, why don't you tell everyone how they can find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, Jessica Fleureau. And I guess also I can probably send out my email address after this.
Awesome. Very cool. And of course, Christoph, where can folks find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn too. So just search for Christophe René or Botify and you will find me in there.
Awesome. Sounds easy peasy. Well, we've reached the end of our time together. Jessica, Christoph, thank you so much for being here with us today. To all of our watchers out there, you will get the recording in just a few hours. And again, while we couldn't get to everyone's questions, do expect a follow-up with all the questions from today, along with the answers. Please stick around for a short survey, no more than 5 minutes, as it will help us improve our webinars overall. With that, we bid you farewell until next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.